What if the most terrifying part of encountering the unknown isn't what you see in the sky, but who comes to your door afterward? Imagine this. You've just witnessed something extraordinary, something that defies everything you know about reality. Your hands are still shaking as you reach for the phone to tell someone, anyone, about what you've just seen. But before you can even finish making that call, there's a knock at your door. You open it to find two men in immaculate black suits, their faces pale and expressionless, their eyes fixed on you with an intensity that makes your blood run cold. They know your name, they know what you saw, and they know things about you that no stranger should ever know. Without raising their voices, without making explicit threats, they make one thing perfectly clear: you will never speak of this again. This isn't science fiction. This isn't a conspiracy theory cooked up on internet forums. For over 70 years, ordinary people across the globe have reported nearly identical encounters with these mysterious figures, encounters that have left them traumatized, silenced, and forever changed. Tonight, we're going to explore the most disturbing aspect of the UFO phenomenon, not the lights in the sky, but the systematic campaign of intimidation that follows them. We're going to examine how a pattern of suppression has operated across continents and decades, targeting everyone from farmers to physicians, from students to political leaders. And we're going to ask the question that nobody wants to answer. If these visitors are simply government agents doing their jobs, why do they behave in ways that seem designed to instill terror rather than gather information? To understand the true scope of what we're dealing with, we need to examine not just individual cases, but the patterns that emerge when you place hundreds of accounts side by side. What you discover is a methodology so consistent, so precisely executed, that it suggests an organized operation spanning generations. The intimidation follows a predictable sequence, almost like a protocol being followed by operators who have refined their techniques over decades of practice. It begins with the sighting itself. Someone sees something they cannot explain, something that challenges their understanding of what's possible. Perhaps it's a disc hovering silently over a field, or lights performing maneuvers that defy the laws of physics, or in rare cases, actual entities that seem neither human nor animal. The witness's first instinct is usually to share this experience, to seek validation, to find others who might have seen the same thing. They tell family members, call local authorities, or reach out to UFO research organizations. And that's when the mechanism activates. Within days, sometimes within hours, the visitors arrive. They come in pairs or groups of 3, dressed in dark suits that somehow seem both immaculate and slightly wrong, as if chosen by someone who learned about professional attire from a manual rather than experience. Their vehicles are typically black sedans, often described as spotlessly clean, yet somehow outdated in style, and witnesses frequently note the absence of license plates or the presence of plates that seem to change between sightings. The timing of their arrival is one of the most disturbing elements. They appear to know about the sighting before any public report has been made, arriving at homes and workplaces with knowledge of conversations that took place behind closed doors. The interrogation that follows adheres to its own strange logic. These visitors rarely introduce themselves with specific credentials, offering instead vague references to government agencies or official investigations. When pressed for identification, they deflect or produce documents that look impressive at first glance, but contain subtle errors, misspellings of agency names, or seals that don't quite match legitimate government insignia. Their questions reveal an interest that goes far beyond simple fact-gathering. They want to know not just what was seen, but who else knows about it, whether photographs were taken, if physical evidence was collected, and, most tellingly, how much the witness intends to discuss the matter publicly. But it's the manner of these visitors that witnesses find most unsettling. Again and again, across decades and continents, people describe the same unnatural qualities. Speech patterns that sound rehearsed or mechanical, as if the visitors are following a script they've memorized imperfectly. Movements that seem stiff or synchronized, lacking the small unconscious adjustments that make human motion natural. Faces described as expressionless or mask-like, with features that somehow don't quite fit together properly. Some witnesses report that the visitors seem uncomfortable with basic aspects of human interaction, staring without blinking, failing to respond to social cues, or displaying confusion about everyday objects and customs. The warnings delivered by these visitors rarely take the form of explicit threats. Instead, they employ a more insidious approach, using implication and psychological pressure to instill fear. They might mention the witness's family members by name, recite personal details that no stranger should possess, or make observations about daily routines that reveal extensive surveillance. The message is always the same, wrapped in different words, but unmistakable in its intent. Speaking about what you saw will bring consequences you don't want to face. And then, as abruptly as they arrived, they leave, often in ways that seem to defy normal expectations. Witnesses describe vehicles that pull away without engine noise, visitors who seem to vanish when followed, or cars that disappear from view impossibly quickly. What happens to people after these visits reveals the true effectiveness of the intimidation. The psychological impact goes far beyond simple fear. Witnesses describe a complete transformation in how they move through the world, a fundamental shift in their sense of safety and autonomy. Many report the development of what can only be described as surveillance anxiety, a constant awareness that they might be being watched, that their phones might be monitored, that strangers in public spaces might be observing them. This isn't paranoia in the clinical sense, it's a rational response to an experience where privacy has been violated in the most profound way. The changes manifest in everyday behaviors that accumulate into a prison of caution. People begin checking their doors and windows multiple times before bed, developing elaborate routines to ensure they're locked. They start taking circuitous routes home, watching their rearview mirrors obsessively, noting the make and model of vehicles that appear too frequently in their neighborhood. Phone conversations become guarded, even with close friends and family members, as witnesses find themselves self-censoring, choosing words carefully, avoiding certain topics entirely. Some report unplugging phones at night or stopping mid-conversation when they hear clicks or static on the line, convinced that someone is listening. The social isolation that follows is perhaps the cruelest consequence. Witnesses find themselves withdrawing from communities they were once active in, declining invitations to gatherings, avoiding places where they might encounter questions about their experience. Those who were involved in UFO research often abandon the field entirely, destroying years of work, cutting ties with colleagues, refusing all future contact. Friends and family notice the change, but rarely understand its cause. The person who was once outgoing becomes withdrawn, the curious investigator becomes silent, the reliable community member becomes a recluse. And because the intimidation operates in shadow, because there's no public record of what happened, no official complaint that can be filed, the victims of this suppression have no recourse, no way to seek help or validation. Physical symptoms frequently accompany the psychological distress. Witnesses report persistent headaches, nausea, sleep disturbances, and a general sense of ill health that doctors cannot explain through conventional diagnoses. Some describe these symptoms beginning immediately after the initial sighting, while others trace them to the visit from the mysterious officials. In cases where witnesses were exposed to alleged craft at close range, the symptoms can be severe enough to require hospitalization, yet medical professionals find no clear cause, no toxin in the blood, no obvious source of the illness. This adds another layer to the intimidation. Even the witness's own body becomes evidence of an encounter they're being told to forget. The effectiveness of this suppression is evident in how thoroughly it disrupts the flow of information. Research organizations find that witnesses who initially provide detailed accounts suddenly become unreachable or retract their statements. Photographs and physical evidence that witnesses promise to share mysteriously disappear or are suddenly claimed never to have existed. Journalists who pursue stories about sightings find their sources going silent, refusing to return calls, denying ever having spoken to reporters. The net effect is the creation of an information vacuum around precisely those cases that might provide the most compelling evidence. The most interesting sightings, those with multiple witnesses and potential physical traces, are the ones most likely to vanish from the public record, leaving behind only rumors and incomplete accounts. When we examine these incidents across the full span of modern UFO history, from the late 1940s to the present day, we discover something remarkable and deeply troubling. The phenomenon doesn't evolve or change its methods to adapt to new technology or social conditions. Instead, it maintains an almost rigid consistency, as if following a playbook that was written once and never revised. This consistency itself is evidence of something significant, whether it points to a long-running government program, a non-human intelligence operating by established protocols, or something else entirely beyond our current understanding. The early cases from the 1950s established what would become the template. Albert Bender's experience with 3 men who appeared in his home, communicating telepathically and commanding him to cease his UFO investigations, set the tone for thousands of accounts that would follow. The speed with which Bender abandoned his thriving organization, the International Flying Saucer Bureau, demonstrated the effectiveness of whatever he encountered. Here was a man passionate enough about the subject to found one of the first civilian UFO groups, yet after a single night, he walked away completely, speaking of the encounter only in cryptic terms that suggested genuine trauma rather than a hoax or publicity stunt. As we moved into the 1960s and 70s, the pattern repeated with almost mechanical precision. In case after case, we see the same elements: the initial sighting, the witness's decision to report it or discuss it publicly, and then the arrival of figures whose behavior marked them as something other than ordinary investigators. Dr. Herbert Hopkins, a respected physician, had his entire approach to life altered after a visitor demonstrated the impossible by making a coin vanish from his hand, and then warned him that his energy was running low, as if he were a machine requiring recharge. The detail that struck Hopkins most forcefully wasn't even the disappearing coin, but the painted-on appearance of the man's lips and the complete absence of any body hair, giving the impression of something constructed rather than born. The geographical spread of these encounters rules out any simple explanation of cultural contamination or copycat accounts. Reports emerged from rural Pennsylvania and urban New Jersey, from the fishing villages of Norway to the farmlands of Brazil, from Canadian suburbs to Australian outback communities. Witnesses who had never heard of previous Men in Black cases, who had no connection to UFO research circles, described identical details. The pale skin stretched tight over facial bones, the outdated or slightly wrong clothing, the mechanical speech patterns, the vehicles that appeared and vanished without normal traffic patterns. The witnesses themselves came from every walk of life and profession, united only by having seen something extraordinary and having made the mistake of trying to share that experience. What's particularly significant is how the phenomenon targets not just casual witnesses, but the infrastructure of UFO research itself. Investigators who compiled case files found their offices broken into, with nothing stolen but documents obviously examined and reorganized. Researchers who achieved prominence in the field reported surveillance that was both obvious and untraceable. Dark sedans that appeared wherever they went, yet vanished when authorities were called. The clear message was that even documenting the experiences of others, even trying to find patterns and make sense of the phenomenon, was itself an activity that would draw attention and consequences. This suggests an operation focused not merely on suppressing individual witnesses, but on preventing any organized understanding of what's occurring. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of this phenomenon is what happens when it intersects with political power. The case of Jimmy Carter provides a unique window into how the suppression operates at the highest levels of government. Here was a man who had personally witnessed a UFO, who spoke openly about his sighting during his campaign for president, and who promised that if elected, he would make all UFO information held by the government available to the public. It was a campaign promise rooted in his broader commitment to transparency and honesty, values that had become his political brand. Yet once in office, that promise evaporated completely. When pressed by reporters, Carter cited national security concerns and effectively closed the door on any hope of disclosure. The question that must be asked is what changed between the campaign trail and the Oval Office? Did Carter simply learn that UFO information was entangled with classified military projects and decide that discretion was warranted? Or was he, like so many others before him, subjected to pressure that convinced him silence was not just preferable, but necessary? While Carter himself never publicly acknowledged being intimidated, accounts from people in his circle tell a different story. Campaign volunteers and staff members reported visits from men in dark suits who discouraged discussion of Carter's UFO interest. Some described being followed, receiving warnings, experiencing the same patterns of intimidation that had silenced ordinary witnesses for decades. The implications are staggering. If these accounts are accurate, it means that the apparatus of suppression doesn't respect even the highest office in the land. The presidency, with all its power and visibility, offers no protection against this shadow operation. This suggests either that the suppression is carried out by elements within government that operate beyond presidential oversight, or that it originates from somewhere outside governmental structures entirely. Either possibility is profoundly disturbing because it implies a power structure that supersedes democratic accountability. Consider what this means for our understanding of how decisions are made at the highest levels. If a president can be pressured into abandoning a public commitment, if the promise of transparency can be so easily reversed, what does that tell us about the real distribution of power in our society? The standard explanation, that presidents receive classified briefings that reveal legitimate national security concerns, becomes less convincing when we examine the broader pattern. Numerous officials, military officers, and intelligence personnel have come forward over the years with accounts of UFO encounters, often at great personal and professional cost. The consistency of their stories and the consistency of the pressure applied to keep them quiet suggests something beyond routine classification protocols. The Carter case also demonstrates how the phenomenon adapts its methods to different contexts. When dealing with ordinary witnesses, the intimidation can be direct and personal, visitors at the door making veiled threats. When dealing with public figures, the approach becomes more subtle, but no less effective. Pressure applied through intermediaries, warnings delivered in the form of classified briefings, the quiet suggestion that certain topics are off-limits for reasons of state. The end result is the same: silence where there might have been disclosure, secrecy where there might have been transparency. One of the most consistent patterns across these accounts is the intense focus on physical evidence. Whenever a witness has captured something tangible, whether photographs, video recordings, samples of alleged craft materials, or items found at landing sites, the response from the mysterious visitors becomes particularly aggressive. This reveals something crucial about the nature of the suppression. It's not primarily concerned with what people believe or discuss, but with preventing the accumulation of material proof that could force mainstream scientific engagement with the phenomenon. The case of Rex Heftlin perfectly illustrates this dynamic. As a highway inspector, Heftlin was accustomed to documenting his observations professionally. When he saw a disc-shaped object hovering in broad daylight, his instinct was to photograph it with the Polaroid camera he carried for work. The resulting images were clear, taken in good light, showing structured craft with visible details. These weren't blurry lights or ambiguous shapes. They were photographic evidence that something extraordinary had occurred. The photographs quickly gained attention when they appeared in local newspapers, and that's when the operation to retrieve them began. The callers who identified themselves as representing NORAD, the visitors who arrived claiming Air Force authority, the systematic pressure applied to Heftlin and his family, all of it focused on recovering those original Polaroids. The fact that copies existed seemed almost irrelevant to these operators. They wanted the originals, the clearest and most detailed evidence. When Heftlin handed them over, they vanished into whatever system these visitors represented, never to be seen again. Meanwhile, the Air Force publicly dismissed the case through Project Blue Book, calling the images inconclusive or possibly hoaxed. The contradiction is stark. If the photographs were worthless, why the elaborate effort to seize them? If they showed nothing significant, why the intimidation of Heftlin's family? This pattern repeats across countless cases. José Antonio da Silva in Brazil, who was abducted and examined aboard a craft, found himself visited by men who seemed particularly interested in whether he had retained any physical marks or materials from his experience. The Richardson case in Ohio, where a fragment of metallic material was recovered from a UFO collision, resulted in repeated visits demanding its return. And when Richardson claimed he had sent it for analysis, he received threats directed at his girlfriend. In the Scandinavian encounters of the 1960s, witnesses who collected samples of scorched earth or metallic fragments from landing sites all reported subsequent visits and pressure to surrender their findings. The message conveyed by this focus on physical evidence is clear. You can believe what you want, you can even talk about it to some degree, but you cannot possess material proof. The threshold that triggers the most aggressive response is not witnessing something extraordinary, but retaining something that could be subjected to independent analysis, something that exists outside the witness's memory and testimony. This suggests that whoever or whatever is behind the suppression understands the power of physical evidence in our scientific culture. Without material proof, extraordinary claims remain in the realm of belief and anecdote. With it, they become matters that demand scientific investigation and potentially mainstream acceptance. The efficiency with which physical evidence disappears from these cases is itself remarkable. Photographs are confiscated and never returned. Samples vanish from researchers' possession under circumstances never fully explained. Recordings are erased or damaged beyond usability. In some instances, even the landing sites themselves are quickly altered, with earth removed, vegetation cleared, or the area simply cordoned off until any physical traces could be naturally degraded or deliberately eliminated. The coordination required for this level of response suggests an organization with substantial resources and authority, capable of rapid deployment anywhere in the world and confident in its ability to operate without leaving bureaucratic traces. What we've been discussing amounts to a sophisticated campaign of psychological warfare waged against civilian populations. The techniques employed in these intimidation operations show clear parallels to methods developed by intelligence agencies for controlling information and managing populations. The use of implied rather than explicit threats, the demonstration of invasive knowledge to establish dominance, the creation of ambient fear that changes behavior without requiring continued direct intervention. These are all hallmarks of psychological operations refined over decades of covert practice. The genius of the approach lies in its efficiency. Unlike physical suppression, which requires ongoing resources and risks creating martyrs whose silence speaks louder than their words, psychological intimidation creates self-maintaining systems of control. A single visit can silence a witness for life, and that witness's silence then contributes to an atmosphere that discourages others from coming forward. Each person who falls quiet becomes evidence for the next potential witness that speaking out carries consequences. The fear spreads through communities without requiring any additional intervention, creating networks of silence that are far more effective than any official denial or debunking program. Consider also how the strangeness of the visitors contributes to the psychological impact. Witnesses are left not just frightened, but deeply confused about what they encountered. Were these government agents? If so, why the bizarre behavior and appearance? Were they something else entirely? Something that only approximated human form?
The ambiguity itself becomes a tool of suppression because it prevents witnesses from forming a clear narrative about what happened to them. You can't file a complaint against men who produce no verifiable credentials. You can't report surveillance by vehicles with no license plates. You can't seek legal recourse against visitors who vanish without trace. The witnesses are left isolated with experiences that sound, even to their own ears, too strange to be believed.
The selection of targets also reveals strategic thinking. The phenomenon doesn't just suppress any and all witnesses randomly. It focuses on those whose testimony might carry particular weight. Professionals like doctors and engineers whose credibility might lend authority to their accounts. Individuals who show signs of organizing others or building networks of researchers. Those who possess particularly clear evidence or compelling documentation. By selectively targeting the most dangerous voices while allowing more ambiguous cases to circulate, the suppression maintains just enough confusion and controversy to prevent any definitive conclusion from forming in the public mind. We've journeyed tonight through 7 decades of documented intimidation, following a trail of fear and silence that stretches from small American towns to international capitals. We've seen how ordinary people who made the extraordinary mistake of witnessing something beyond current explanation found themselves targeted by a campaign of suppression so consistent and so widespread that it demands explanation. Whether these mysterious visitors are intelligence operatives working for agencies that admit no public existence, whether they represent a non-human intelligence that understands psychological manipulation with disturbing sophistication, or whether they are something else entirely that we lack even the conceptual framework to understand, their effect on our collective knowledge is undeniable. They have successfully prevented, for 3/4 of a century, the accumulation of evidence and testimony that might have forced mainstream science and government to seriously engage with the UFO phenomenon. They have transformed what could have been a matter of public knowledge and open investigation into a realm of ridicule and silence. And they have done this not through the crude methods of authoritarian control, but through the subtle art of making people afraid to speak, afraid to remember, afraid to seek the truth. The pattern continues to this day, adapting to new technologies and social media platforms, but maintaining its core methodology. Somewhere in the shadows between official denial and unofficial acknowledgement, the men in black still operate. And the question that should concern us all is this: in a society that claims to value truth and transparency, how is it possible that such a program of systematic intimidation can continue for so long, affecting so many, while remaining officially invisible? The answer to that question might be more disturbing than any flying saucer could ever be.